Welcome back into the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap, presented by Full Press Coverage. We are barreling towards the NBA playoffs, Sap, as most teams have around 8 or 9 games left in the season. So things are really tightening up as we're looking to see exactly how the races will be determined so we can have a good idea of who's going to advance. But before all that, Sap, you got to make sure your players are healthy if you want to have a good run in the postseason. And that's a concern for a lot of teams right now, as a lot of major players are down with the injury bug, either questionable or out as we head into this final, like I said, 8 or 9 game stretch of the regular season. Joel Embiid, LeBron James, Karl Anthony Towns, Paul George, Kevin Durant, just to name a few, are all questionable or injured. And those teams are all in the thick of heavy playoff races right now. Talk about Joel Embiid, we'll talk about the Celtics and the Sixers and the Cavs and the Bucks as they jostle for standing in the Eastern Conference. So that's very, very impactful, obviously. And then out in the West, Sap, we've talked about LeBron's injury for a while now. Karl Anthony Towns just came back for his first game in months. Paul George went down earlier in the week with a knee injury that looked a lot worse than it actually seems like it's going to be. Fortunately, we still don't have a timetable for him. But it looks like he's not going to be out for the rest of the season in the playoffs. And Kevin Durant looks like he's going to come back from his ankle injury, I believe, this week, Sapper, this weekend. So some clarity, but again, a lot of injuries as we head down the stretch here.
This is always the case, Jet. And again, we've seen over the last several years, you look at how a team's health is going into the postseason. If they remain healthy in the postseason, obviously gives them a better chance to win the championship. Last year, Rob Williams wasn't quite right for the Sixers. He still played. He wasn't as we got deep into the playoffs. Golden State was better than the Celtics. They deserved to win the championship. But, you go back even last year in the playoffs, Phoenix, which had the best regular season record, Devin Booker got hurt late in the season. Chris Paul got hurt late in the season, and they weren't quite right in the postseason, lost in the second round to Dallas. And now we're talking about superstars here. These aren't just fringe players. These are impactful players that are dealing with some sort of injuries, and it becomes a slog. It feels more like the NHL playoffs, where the healthiest team sometimes is the last one standing. So we're going to have to see how those 5 players you mentioned, and even some players on the periphery, how they are health-wise and how they're going to be going into the playoffs and through the playoffs.
Yeah, absolutely. And, we're talking about a lot of teams in terms of who their best players are. And we're also talking about a team that I think is really interesting in the Phoenix Suns, Sap, that made by far the biggest move at the trade deadline or around there, and landing Kevin Durant, vaulting them from what we thought was maybe, a first round or second round exit to a title favorite. Kevin Durant's played, I think, 5 games with them. And so it's very important for them to get him back and get him into the mix. Listen, like you said, Sap, you've said this a million times. He's probably the easiest star in the NBA to play with, but there is something to feeling comfortable around your new teammates and getting at least some chemistry. Like 5 games, that's not really enough in my mind to go on a deep playoff run, unless, a lot of these teams in the West just sort of lay down and look at the star power of the Suns and say, okay, we can't beat this team.
He fits seamlessly with any players, with the possible exception, of course, with Russell Westbrook in his last few years in Oklahoma City. And, oh, by the way, Russell Westbrook is probably the polar opposite of Kevin Durant. Durant just fits in, blends in, goes out and gets his 30 points on like 17 shots. He's so efficient, where Westbrook, every place he goes, it's kind of chaotic, right? We saw that with Kevin Durant, Oklahoma City, and then he goes to Washington. He goes to the Lakers. Before that, he went to Houston, and it just never quite fits in. So Durant will step in and just pick up where he left off in those games he played about a month ago with the Phoenix Suns. I don't have any issues with that. I think Phoenix, if he's healthy and playing the way Kevin Durant plays, and why wouldn't he? I think they're the favorites in the Western Conference. There are a few other teams in there that are middle of the road teams. I look at Golden State, seems to be finding itself a little bit now.
Yeah, they're the boogeyman out there, for sure.
Exactly. Yeah, they're starting to win on the road, which if they start to, peel off some wins on the road, they can move up a little bit in the seedings. And who the hell wants to face them with Steph Curry and Klay Thompson having his best year in like 5 years? He's playing like Klay Thompson circa 2017. He's been outstanding. So, yeah, there's a lot to be done there. Even look at Minnesota. If Karl Anthony Towns is right, it's a guy who missed 50 games over a 3-month stretch. They could be a factor as well. They have some playoff experience from a year ago. But Durant's easy to see because he'll just step right in and do what he does. Chris Paul's a veteran. Booker's a all NBA caliber player. So I think they're going to be tough to deal with. The injury that really, I think, set off the biggest red flag is Joel Embiid straining that calf earlier in the week. Now, it doesn't appear to be all that serious, but any injury with Embiid is serious because it seems like every year by the end of the regular season into the playoffs, he's not quite right. It seems like he just doesn't have enough steam left. He's not the best conditioned player in the league, to say the least. And the other thing, too, is anytime you hear about a calf strain or any type of calf injury, it's very alarming because let's not forget 4 years ago when Kevin Durant ended up blowing out his Achilles,
Right.
the injury that took place a week or two before that was what? A calf. Oftentimes, a calf strain, a calf injury can be a harbinger of something going on somewhere else. So you're going to have to monitor that going forward.
Yeah, without a doubt, Embiid has struggled, I think, to stay fully healthy, obviously, in his career. And in the playoffs, he's sort of run out of gas. And it's hard when you see just how gigantic of a man he is. And this season, he's really made an effort to try to play in as many games as possible. Seems like he's really going for that MVP award, too, that could potentially have ramifications in the postseason for Philadelphia. So that's definitely something to keep an eye on, Sap. And obviously the biggest name of all the injuries on this list is LeBron James, who's been out for a while now with a foot. Talking about him potentially returning for the last week of the season. How badly do the Lakers need him back in order to stay in this play-in race, Sap? Right now, they're the 9 seed, so they are in the play-in, but they are tied with the Oklahoma City Thunder and New Orleans Pelicans and just a half game up on the Utah Jazz in terms of staying in that play-in race.
Literally 3 games separates 4 through 12 in the Western Conference. So even though there's a little more than 2 weeks left, we have no clue who's going to be in the play-in or who may be the number 4 seed in the Western Conference. According to Jay Williams, not that important that LeBron comes back with the Lakers. Maybe won't have that much of an impact in the postseason. And I'm not being hyperbolic here. Maybe I'm going a little bit overboard, to say the least. But Jay Williams was asked about LeBron coming back and how it would fit. And as great as LeBron is, he's not Kevin Durant as far as coming back and fitting in quickly, right? Because LeBron is ball dominant and you kind of have to fit with him. He's a little bit tougher to deal with as a teammate than, say, Kevin Durant. But Jay Williams did say, what are we going to do when LeBron comes back? It's going to be fewer touches for Austin Reeves. And I thought he was being sarcastic or trying to be funny. I think he meant what he said. Austin Reeves, really? I mean, this would be like Patriot fans 6 years ago when Tom Brady served a 4-game suspension if they were worrying about they weren't getting enough touches for Jacoby Brissett. Like, Tom Brady's ready to come back to play quarterback. He comes back to play quarterback. If LeBron James is ready to give you 36 minutes a night, he's playing 36 minutes a night. The only way the Lakers contend for a title is a healthy LeBron James, a healthy Anthony Davis, and the rest of the players just have to figure it out and fit in because that's their ceiling. The highest ceiling is with LeBron and Davis healthy.
I mean, the question is, Sap, is LeBron willing to play second fiddle to Austin Reeves, who's now clearly the best player in the Lakers?
Yeah, according to Skip Bayless as well, loves Austin Reeves. Of course, Skip loves all of LeBron's teammates because it makes LeBron look less significant. As we've heard many times with Skip Bayless, he always diminishes Scottie Pippen, makes it sound like Scottie Pippen was this average player who was just along for the ride with Michael Jordan, when Scottie Pippen was a really good Robin to Michael Jordan's Batman. To me, that's still the ultimate Batman and Robin was Jordan and Pippen because they understood their roles so well. Yeah, Austin Reeves has been a nice player. He's been averaging 18 a game this month. Great. D'Angelo Russell has done a nice job. But these are your secondary players. You got to get the big guy back. Got to get Anthony Davis to stay healthy. I don't think anybody wants to face the Lakers. In the play-in tournament, that's always sketchy because it's, one game. But, if they can make it into the playoffs and they're playing, I don't know, Denver or Sacramento or Memphis in the first round, they can beat any of those teams if LeBron and Anthony Davis are healthy and those secondary role players are doing their job. They could be a factor in the Western Conference. The West is just so congested at this point that, one day you feel that the Lakers could be a contending team. And if they don't close the season correctly, they may not even make the play-in. It's that close.
Right. Yeah, absolutely. They could, either avoid it altogether and be a relatively high seed, or they'd miss it altogether. Like you said, it's that close right now. Such little separation. And in terms of LeBron coming back too, Sap, it's also important to note, they made a roster upheaval at the trade deadline too, and LeBron has not had many games with these new guys on the Lakers. So like I said with Durant earlier, I think it's important for him to get some reps with those guys. But you also said this too, Sap, that it's much easier for Durant to find, rhythm with guys because he can just sort of he doesn't need the ball. LeBron's got to find chemistry with a bunch of new teammates that he really didn't have time to develop with because he got injured pretty quickly after they joined the roster.
You could put Kevin Durant in a time machine and drop him into the 86 Celtics and he would fit perfectly. Right? I mean, that's the way his game is. LeBron being ball dominant, he's the leader of the team. He's going to dictate what you do on offense. It's a little bit more difficult. So, yeah, I'd like to see LeBron get back as soon as possible, get some reps. Again, with Anthony Davis, they play really well together. But Hachimura, D'Angelo Russell, Austin Reeves, as much as we've kidded about him, he's been really good for the Lakers. I think they made really good moves at the trade deadline and can be a factor. But I think it's imperative for LeBron to get back, get those reps with his teammates, and start to feel that confidence that he always exhibits once he gets to the postseason.
All right, Sap, let me ask you this before we move on to the Eastern Conference. Right now, at the 5 seed are the Clippers, who are 10.5 games back of Denver, but they are only 3.5 games up on Utah, who is the current 12 seed. Who do you have in terms of who's going to miss this play-in? So the Clippers, the Suns, the Warriors, Minnesota, Dallas, LA, New Orleans, Oklahoma City, Utah are all separated by 3.5 games or less, Sap. So 2 teams on that list is going to miss this thing completely. Do you want to put your money where your mouth is and predict who those 2 teams will be? Right now, it's Oklahoma City and Utah on the outside looking in.
And that's the way I think it ends. Only because at the beginning of the season, it felt like they were both tanking. They own like half of the first round picks in the next several drafts.
True.
So if they're not in there, then they have a chance to maybe win the draft lottery, albeit a very slim chance. We thought they were tanking, and more power to those coaching staffs on Utah and Oklahoma City to go out and be competitive and be right there, essentially having the same record as the Pelicans, the Lakers, the T-Wolves, and all those other teams who I think are more talented.
Dallas,
I think the Clippers,
too, yeah.
Dallas is well, are we surprised that it hasn't worked in Dallas? I mean, obviously, Luka's been injured.
I'm not.
No, not really. When it works, and there have been games where it works, it's beautiful to watch. But then there's going to be games where who's the closer? Is it Kyrie? Is it Luka? They're both ball dominant, so it hasn't really worked well. And I think at times Luka's tried to maybe see too much power to Kyrie Irving. As we were talking about a couple of weeks ago, in the fourth quarter and overtime, Kyrie was taking 2.5 times more shots than Luka Doncic. That should not be the case. They should be guys that close at about the equal amount because they're both really great closers. Just hasn't worked out yet. But I think they'll still sneak in because of the high-end talent. Now Luka's back, so they should be able to find their way into at least the play-in tournament. I think Golden State and Phoenix will avoid the play-in tournament because their talent level's high and they seem to be playing better now with Durant coming back. We expect Phoenix to be that good. The Lakers is going to be tough for them to get to the 6. They may have to play through the play-in, but that could give them another game or 2 to establish some chemistry and be ready for Memphis or Sacramento or Denver. And I think they'd have a real chance against them. But I would say Utah and Oklahoma City are probably the 2 most likely teams to miss out on the play-in, only because it just felt all season long that they were tanking. And again, give them credit. They're right there. But I think that they probably have the least amount of talent compared to all those teams, although Shai Gilgeous-Alexander's been phenomenal. Lauri Markkanen's been outstanding. Those 2 guys have really carried those 2 franchises.
Yeah, without a doubt. I mean, it's fascinating to see it's separated by such, little amount of games. You think, oh, wow, Golden State has had much better season than Oklahoma City. Well, they only have 2 more wins than them. So It's really not that. It's really, again, razor thin margin in the West. The only things that are settled is 1, 2, and 3, which is pretty much the same case in the Eastern Conference, Sap. And we don't know what order so much in the Eastern Conference, but we do know that barring something crazy happening, the Bucks, the Celtics, and the Sixers in some order will be the 1, 2, and the 3 seed, and then the Cavaliers will be the 4 seed in the Eastern Conference. And the rest of it is sort of a little bit undetermined right now. But I think you have a better sense, certainly in the East, what's going to happen right now. And now these top 3 teams are really, with 9 games left, jockeying for position. Of the 3, the Philadelphia 76ers have been the hottest. They are 9-1 in their last 10. The Celtics have been the coldest. They're 5-5 in their last 10. And then the Bucks are sort of chugging along at 7-3 in their last 10. But you mentioned Sap at the top, Embiid, a little banged up. Celtics may be righted the ship with a big win in Sacramento the other night, but they have not been playing well at all. And like I said, Milwaukee just keeps winning games. So it will be fascinating to see how this goes. And I think the conventional thinking is that whoever ends up as the 1 seed should be in the best shape, because then they get to avoid, they get to see the 2 and the 3 beat each other up in the next round. But I don't think Cleveland's an enviable matchup in the second round either, Sap. And that's the presumptive second round. We have that as our Final Four in the East. We've talked about this for months now.
I feel really confident that the Final Four in the East will be, in some order, Milwaukee, Boston, Philadelphia, and Cleveland. I know the Knicks have had a nice season, but I don't think they can beat Cleveland in a 7-game series, because in that particular series, the best player on the court will be a member of the Cleveland Cavaliers and Donovan Mitchell. So I think that's going to be the Final Four in the Eastern Conference, unless Embiid is injured. Now Philadelphia becomes susceptible to maybe being upset. But after the Knicks at 5, you've got Miami, which is an old team, which doesn't appear to have much steam. They'll still be dangerous because they're so mentally tough and so well coached. Maybe you want to kind of avoid them. But let's go back a year, Jet. Remember when the Celtics were jockeying with Milwaukee for the 2 and 3 spots in the Eastern Conference, because Miami was going to win the East? Remember people saying the Celtics don't want to finish second because they would have to play Brooklyn in the first round. Well, they were able to sweep Brooklyn. Yep. And it wasn't an easy sweep. I mean, it sounds like obviously a Yogi Berra statement. It was a close sweep, if that's possible, because the Celtics won the 4 games by a total of 18 points. But in the end, when the Celtics played Milwaukee in the second round, the Celtics had home court advantage. Game 7 was at TD Garden, and the Celtics won to advance to the conference final. So that second spot not only is important because, you get 2 series with home court advantage, and if there's an upset, maybe you're hosting the Eastern Conference final. So, yeah, I think that's where the Celtics may end up slotting in. It's going to be difficult to catch Milwaukee, although the Celtics do play at Milwaukee in less than a week. If they're able to win that game, they then win the season series, which gives them the tiebreaker. Maybe they're able to be the 1 seed. But the 4 teams in the East are that strong, and I think no one's really going to crash that party. And you're so right. I picked Cleveland before the season to win the East. I'll stick with it. I think it would be a minor upset if they were able to, say, beat Milwaukee and then Boston in back-to-back series. But they're good enough to do that. We've seen them beat the Celtics 3 out of 4 so far in the regular season. And, I think that they can certainly cause a lot of problems out there. But that should be the Final Four, provided Embiid is Embiid and he's healthy.
Yeah, and Sap, if you remember, and I believe it was the last game of the last season, the Celtics played Memphis, and Memphis was rested all their starters. The Celtics played all of theirs. If the Celtics had punted in that game, they would have, like you said, avoided Brooklyn. And they decided to go for the seeding instead of the opponent, and it worked out well for them. They went to the, obviously went to the NBA Finals as a result of that. So, home court certainly is going to be a big determining factor in this. And I don't think there's any of those lower seeds like Brooklyn was last year, where you're like, oh, you really want to avoid them. I think these teams, especially at the top of the East, feel pretty confident that they are superior to the teams below them, and that they don't expect a first round upset. Like you said, New York has played really well this season. Miami is not going to be an easy out, but I don't think that there's really any fear involved with those teams. But yeah, the big race, Sap, to me is just, I agree with you. Milwaukee will be hard to catch. Boston and Philadelphia are separated by half a game right now. The Celtics do own the tiebreaker against them, so that's a big thing for them. But that's going to be, I think, a very likely 7-game series situation. And we know that both these teams have big home court advantages, Sap. The Celtics are 26-9 at home. Philadelphia 26-11 at home. Both outstanding home records, and would obviously be a massive advantage to play that Game 7 on that home court. So there's a lot on the line in these last 9-10 games. The Celtics, I mentioned this I think the other week, Sap, do have a pretty favorable schedule down the stretch here, starting with the Pacers tonight. A little bit more tricky for the 76ers. I'll just ring them off real quick for you right now. The Celtics end their season with Indiana, San Antonio, Washington, Milwaukee, Utah, Philly, Toronto, Atlanta. Philadelphia ends their season with Golden State, Phoenix, Denver, Dallas, Toronto, Milwaukee, Boston, Miami, Atlanta, Brooklyn. So a lot more difficult for the 76ers. The Celtics, based on schedule alone and having that tiebreaker, should be the 2 seed, but they've been playing really poor recently. So, I mean, it's still definitely a real question. But again, based on that schedule, the Celtics should end up with a 2 seed, and Philadelphia should end up with a 3 seed.
Celtics have 6 of their final 9 at home. They're playing some teams that are playing for nothing, where every team Philadelphia is playing is either in the playoffs or contending for a playoff spot. So those teams are going to have a lot to battle for. So they should be in good shape to be the 2 seed. And it's very difficult with the new play-in tournament system, which has now been in existence for this will be the 3rd year. You don't know who the 7 and 8 are going to be. So you can't really tank for 2 or tank for 3 to avoid 7. I mean, you can't really do that because you don't know who 7 and 8 are going to be, because they have their own little tournament in there. Give Brooklyn credit. They've been competitive after trading Durant and Kyrie Irving, but, I don't think they're going to scare anyone. Atlanta's got Trae Young. He's a guy who can win a game or 2 on his own, but what else? Toronto's well coached, but they've been a middling team all year. Chicago's the weird team that somehow beats good teams and loses to bad teams, but none of those teams would really scare me. I feel 95% confident that the Eastern Conference semifinals will be Milwaukee, Boston, Philadelphia, and Cleveland, and probably most likely Milwaukee against Cleveland, Celtics against Philadelphia. I'd be shocked if it was any other form than those setups.
Yeah, 2.5 game lead for the Bucks with about 9 to play, and the Bucks don't have I mean, they have a couple tough games in there, but not a crazy hard schedule. They should feel pretty confident that they have that 1 seed, unless they really collapse down the stretch here. Obviously, that game, Milwaukee and Boston next week, will have massive implications. If the Bucks win it, it's over. They are the 1 seed. If the Celtics win that, then the Bucks might sweat a little bit there.
Mm-hmm.
So that will definitely be a game that we talk about next week that has a lot of ramifications. That's next Thursday, Sap. So a lot of eyes will be on that game. And then, if we're talking about the play-in in the East, Sap, you mentioned Chicago's beating some good teams and stuff like that. It's not as exciting. The teams that are trying to get in right now, they're on the outside looking in. Indiana is a game and a half back of Chicago. Washington is 2.5 games back. They're probably more comfortable going for the Wembanyama sweepstakes at this point. Really, what's the point of getting throttled by Milwaukee or Boston in the first round? Probably not very enticing. So I think that it'll probably, exactly as it is right now, is where it will stay. Sap, do you have any sort of guess on that?
No, I think you're right. I think those 2 teams will fall out of contact. I mean, Indiana had a nice start to the season. Halliburton's been in and out of the lineup the last month, it feels like. So I don't think they're going to really be a factor. Washington been below 500 for most of the season, so I think they'll fall out of it. And those other 4 teams, some sort of combination of Chicago and Toronto and Miami, and all of those teams will battle it out. And again, who's ever 7 will most likely play the Celtics, and who's ever 8 will play Milwaukee. And good luck with that, because those teams I don't think can match up with Milwaukee and the Celtics, who still are perceived to be the 2 best teams in basketball. I know the Celtics have gone through some bumps the last several months, but I still think, when healthy and focused, that they're going to be difficult to beat in a 7-game series. So the East is much more predictable. The West, it's going to feel like the NCAA tournament when, Princeton somehow is advancing to the Sweet 16, or Florida Atlantic is in the Elite 8. I mean, you could see some wild series in the Western Conference. The East, much more predictable.
Absolutely. So, Sap, before we wrap up the show today, we did want to talk a little bit about the passing of an NBA legend. Willis Reed passed away this week. Former MVP, former 2-time Finals MVP, Sap, 2-time NBA champion, Hall of Famer, obviously, and a guy who is responsible for one of the most iconic moments, not just in the NBA, but in North American sports, coming back on the injured leg to play in the NBA Finals. He was 80 years old, played, I believe, his whole career for the Knicks. And you could make a case he's the greatest Knick in franchise history. There's some debate between him, Patrick Ewing, Walt Frazier. I guess maybe you could say Carmelo
That's about
Anthony,
it. Maybe Bernard King,
wanted...
but he wasn't there long enough. I would take Bernard King over Carmelo Anthony. Bernard King's peak was just incredible. He finished second in MVP voting in '84 to Larry Bird. He was unstoppable. He literally carried an average team to a 7-game defeat to the Celtics, who were eventual champions in 1984. No, Willis Reed's right there with Walt Frazier. I think is probably the 2 greatest Knicks, along with Patrick Ewing. When I first fell in love with basketball was in the early 70s. And believe it or not, I was a Celtics fan when I was 8 or 9 years old. LeBron wasn't in the league yet. He
No,
wasn't
not
too far
yet.
away from entering the league. He's been in the league that long. But I remember going to those playoff games, Celtics, Knicks. Tickets were easy to get back then. My brother was a big Celtics fan, 9 years older than me. So we'd go into the game. And
You
the
snuck in,
rivalry was
Sap. You didn't
outside.
pay for
No,
tickets. I
we
don't
got
believe you.
good tickets, really good tickets. You could sit in really good seats for like $7 back then because, the Celtics weren't as big as the Bruins then. The Bruins ruled the town because they had Bobby Orr. But those matchups, and they played 3 straight years in the playoffs, and the Knicks won the first 2 times. The Celtics broke through in 74. Those teams were so well constructed. You would have loved those Knicks teams. I know as a Celtics fan, you probably wouldn't, but as a basketball fan, you would. All 5 of their starters on the 73 championship team are in the Hall of Fame, right? So you had Walt Frazier, Earl the Pearl Monroe. That was the backcourt. You had Willis Reed at center, Dave DeBusschere, and Bill Bradley as your forwards. 3 of the starting 5 of the Celtics are in the Hall of Fame: JoJo White, John Havlicek, and Dave Cowens. And both teams played great defense. The movement on offense was poetic. It was just beautiful, beautiful basketball. And Willis Reed was on many nights the best player on the court. And you talked about that iconic moment. Game 7 of the 1970 NBA Finals. It's the Knicks against the Lakers. And Game 7 was at Madison Square Garden. And Willis Reed got injured early in Game 5. He missed the rest of Game 5, missed all of Game 6. No one thought he'd be back for Game 7, and you just assumed the Lakers would win because the Lakers had Chamberlain, West, and Elgin Baylor, all, I wouldn't say in their prime, but still forces, right? And without Willis Reed, there was no chance that the Knicks were going to win Game 7, even though it was at home. Well, before the game starts, out comes Willis Reed out of the tunnel. He plays 27 minutes. He only scored 4 points and got 3 rebounds, but he hit a couple of early buckets that got the crowd totally into it, and there was no stopping them at that moment. We always hear when a player is injured and he comes back into the game, it's a Willis Reed moment.
Right.
That's how big that was. People forget that in Game 7 of the 1970 NBA Finals, Walt Frazier had 36 points, 19 assists, and 7 rebounds. He was the best player on the court.
It's the Willis Reed game.
It was the Willis Reed game. Yeah, exactly. And that was on a night when you had Will Chamberlain, Jerry West, and Elgin Baylor on the court. I mean, talk about some talent. But they won 2 championships with Willis Reed, and they haven't won any since. They've only been to 2 finals since Willis Reed retired back in 1974-75. So he was
only won a handful of playoff series since that time.
They've won one playoff series since the late 90s, and that was against the Celtics in 2013. I mean, they've been irrelevant. The thing about Willis Reed at the time, early 70s, there were so many great centers. You had Wilt, you had the then Lou Alcindor, you had Willis Reed, Wes Unseld, Dave Cowens, Bob Lanier, Nate Thurman, Walt Bellamy. Bob McAdoo was more of a face the basket stretch 4, but he was a great player as well. I mean, teams were constructed from the inside out back then. You try to go get a big man and then build around them. It's different now, although, your 3 leading MVP candidates right now are bigs, although Giannis is a forward, Jokic is Embiid are centers. So, Willis Reed had to battle those guys every single night. When they won the championship in 1970, he had to face Wes Unseld in the first round, the then Lou Alcindor in the second round, and Will Chamberlain in the finals. That's pretty tough. And he was able to win that championship.
That's a murderer's row of Hall of Fame centers.
Holy crap.
I didn't realize this too, looking up, doing some research on Willis Reed before the show today. 2nd round draft pick, Sap. Not super heralded coming into the NBA.
Yeah, that's when he got drafted,
at a Grambling State. Not really a basketball school.
No, more of football school. And was he the 8th overall pick in the draft? Because the first round was, I think, 7 or 8 picks.
8th pick in the 2nd round. Yeah.
Yeah. Or 8th overall, though. I mean, it was just like.
Is that how it works?
I think
this was 1964, so I don't know.
Yeah, there weren't as many.
Yeah,
teams in
you're
the
right.
league.
But okay. So there were 7 picks in the first round. He was the 8th overall pick.
Right.
But that was the first pick in the 2nd round, essentially.
Today he'd be a lottery pick, a very high lottery pick, which is different back then. Yeah, of course. But it's just a great player. And again, I know you would have loved those Knicks teams, other than the fact that they played in New York, because they played the game perfectly. I mean, their offense was poetry, and they were great defensive players. Frazier was a great defensive player. DeBusschere, Reed. I mean, they were just. The Celtics had difficulty beating them.
Sap,
great too.
I'd say that, my grandparents are born and raised in Brooklyn and grew up
Sure.
as Knicks fans. So they told me a lot about this, these Knicks teams growing up, as I've always been a basketball junkie. And so I wanted to learn more and more and more. And, they raved about these Knicks teams and how beloved they were in the 70s. And my grandfather would always tell me about how they had, multiple geniuses on the team.
Oh.
And I was like, well, what do you mean? And he said, well, Phil Jackson obviously is a basketball genius.
Yep.
Bill Bradley is a
Road
legitimate,
scholar, literally a road
legitimate
scholar.
genius.
Yeah, former
ran
U.S.
for-
senator. Yep.
Ran for president, former U.S. senator. Jerry Lucas, I believe, could memorize the phone book. If I'm recalling that story correctly,
Exactly.
he had an
That's right.
eidetic
You know what?
memory.
Yeah, I forgot about, Jerry Lucas was coming off the bench.
Right, and
And
Dave
as was Phil
DeBusschere was the
Jackson.
commissioner of the ABA.
and then became general manager of the Knicks. Willis Reed was the coach with the Knicks and with the Nets. Really bright guy. Walt Frazier is fantastic doing the games, still doing the Knicks games, and just such a fashion icon. Oh yeah, no, that team was spectacular. And again, let's
Personalities and intelligence.
and intelligence. Yeah, exactly. And the Celtics had Havlicek and Cowens and JoJo White and Paul Silas. It was a fascinating matchup. And, basketball was king in New York, as it oftentimes is. If the Knicks are really good, that is still an electric place to watch basketball games. They went to 3 finals in a 4-year period, and they played the Lakers in each final with Wilt Chamberlain and Jerry West. And in a couple of those finals, Elgin Baylor, then Baylor got injured and didn't play in one of the other finals, but they were going up against the Iron. I mean, look at the poor Lakers. I know it's odd to say that. I mean, I'm a Lakers fan because of LeBron, but the poor Lakers, they couldn't beat the Celtics. Once Russell retired, they were probably like, okay, we just got to get back to the finals and start winning championships. And the Knicks kind of replaced the Celtics as the best team in the Eastern Conference. And the Lakers did break through in 1972, beat the Knicks in the NBA Finals. But yeah, those teams were just a joy to watch. And again, that's where I was weaned on basketball, just going to those games. And again, I was a Celtics fan at that point. So I'm like, JoJo White's better than Walt Frazier. And JoJo White was great, but Walt Frazier was a little bit better. And Reed and Cowens had great matchups in the low post. And both of those guys could also drift away from the basket. Reed was an outstanding passer. I mean, it was just fantastic basketball. I mean, the skill level then isn't what it is now, but in many ways, the basketball was better because the teams were together. They played every game. There wasn't load management. I don't want to sound like an old guy, but the symmetry on the court was it was beautiful basketball.
Yeah, there's a terrific book, and I believe they turned it into a 30 for 30 documentary called When the Garden Was Eden about this team, about these Willis Reed Knicks teams in the 70s, and how important they were to the culture of the city and the Knicks legacy. It's funny, Sap, that we could talk about a Celtics fan, Laker fan, say, okay, well, with this 08 Celtics championship team, how would they do against Larry Bird's team in the 80s? How would that team do against the Cowens team and the Havlicek team in the 70s, against the Russell team in the 60s? This is all the Knicks fans have, Sap.
That's
literally. It. They say, which was the best team in Knicks? That's not a trivia question, like a debate question, I should say. It's a trivia question. This was the best Knicks team in history. There's no other team that compares to it. The two championship teams, and then there's been nothing that's been even close.
It's like being a Jets fan, right? They won Super Bowl III. They've never been back to the Super Bowl. Now they will next February with Aaron Rodgers leading the way. But, again, the Jets and the Knicks are kind of in the same boat of that, their fondest memories are like 50 plus years ago. I mean, the Jets won their one Super Bowl. Lyndon Johnson was president and man had not yet walked on the moon. That's how long ago it happened. So, yeah, those are two franchises that are in the nation's biggest city that have great fan bases, but they just can't sometimes get out of their own way. It would be great if the Knicks could get back into contention. It's the best basketball market, in my opinion, in the smartest fan base, but they just haven't been able to seal the deal and contend year in and year out. But those teams were just great. But it is kind of sad for a franchise that they can only harken back to 1970 and 1973. I mean, unless you're 60, you don't really remember that.
Right. Yeah. I mean, which is wild. There's two generations of Knicks fans that have experienced nothing.
No, Patrick Ewing losing Game 7 to Olajuwon in '94 was like the high point.
Yeah. So it is, I, as a person who despises all New York sports, it's funny for me, but as a person who loves the NBA, if the Knicks were legitimate title contenders year in and year out for a period of time, it would be so fun. It would be so fun. but they're not. And even this year with a nice little team, they're nowhere close, Sap, to competing for a championship.
No, maybe they should have traded for Donovan Mitchell, like we all thought they were going to. Instead, he goes to Cleveland and has
At least
that
give him
team
some
as title
juice.
contenders. He definitely would have gave them some juice without question. And look, Jalen Brunson's been outstanding. Julius Randle's phenomenal. I mean, if you were able to put Donovan Mitchell on that team, I don't know how the money would work with Brunson being a free agent, whatever. The capologists figure that stuff out. But Brunson, Mitchell, and Julius Randle, that's a pretty good big three. I think they'd be at least the fourth best team in the Eastern Conference, but they'd have more juice with Donovan Mitchell. But the weird thing about the Knicks, Jet, is they're never able to excel in the draft. They're always just missing out on players, right? I mean, they won the draft lottery in '85 with Ewing. And since then, they're always getting like the 5th or the 6th or the 7th pick. And they're not able to get those real impact players. Like they're never quite bad enough, or when they're bad enough, they, lose out in the lottery and end up with the 4th pick. And they're not able to get that impact player.
They missed out on Steph Curry by 1 pick, took Jordan Hill.
Yeah, that's their fault. Minnesota also had 2 chances to get Steph Curry. Instead, they went with Johnny Flynn and Ricky Rubio. Instead, they picked point guards.
Rubio's had a nice career, so Sap, I mean, you can't really fault them for that. Come on.
Just like Steph Curry, very similar to Steph.
I think Johnny Flynn didn't even make his rookie contract out of the NBA, but that's...
Well, that's a big thing with Nick rookies.
Oh, they never make it past their rookie contract.
Yeah. You know the last first-round pick by the Knicks that signed a second contract past his rookie contract was Charlie Ward in like the 90s, and he won the
Heisman Trophy winner. Yeah.
Famous for being a Heisman Trophy winner. So, look, they've got stinky ownership. Can we call it that?
Oh, yeah.
Old Italian saying, and I'm sure in everyone's culture there's something similar. The fish stinks from the head down, and that's the case with the New York Knicks. But again, rest in peace to the great Willis Reed.
Yeah, rest in peace, Willis Reed, and the Knicks. You'll always have the memories of him walking out in Game 7, all-time great sports moment. So rest in peace, Willis Reed. That's going to do it for us here at the Pick and Roll NBA podcast with Jet and Sap. Thanks to Full Press Coverage. Make sure you check out their website. Make sure you check out our social medias at JohnSap25, at Jet Stryer for more show updates, polls, all sorts of stuff. We don't limit our tweets to just basketball. We're talking about everything. Sap's going to get very excited as soon as close as Aaron Rodgers, he gets to go into the Jets. I'm sure he's going to be tweeting lots about that, maybe writing a couple articles. So make sure you check out that. And we'll be back next week with a couple of new podcasts. So stay tuned for that. Thanks for listening, everybody. We will talk to you later. See ya.